that my son and I have literally been tortured. My son has been physically, brutally assaulted in this country, and there have been police officers and law enforcement covering up evidence. I had state workers bringing my son into visits to see me with shocking things, having evidence on his body of someone cut out a mark on his face that was from tinea versicolor, from a yeast infection that he got at the same time I did. We weren't treated for a thrush infection, and it became systemic, and at the time we didn't know it, but we were also living in a moldy house. And so that, I'm sure, aggravated things. But in my attempt to prove that I was not a hypochondriac, I upset a lot of doctors who didn't want to get sued. And when I said that mark on his face is evidence that he still has this, he is a child, but he has it, just as I do. And the next visit he showed up, and that mark on his cheek had been cut out. It was just that spot. And at that time I had a video camera with me. I was taking just general video of myself and my son from a distance, but I think someone feared that I would possibly capture that on a tape. And he came in to visit us with black eyes, telling me that a man did this to him. He had bruises all over his legs, consistently, up and down both of his legs. It was unmistakable. There's no possible way that CPS didn't see it. And he once came to a visit. With permanent solution sent on his breath. And I'm not going to cry this time. And so it was permanent solution. I've had perms before. There was no mistaking the smell. And he was out of it. He was barely able to stay awake and focus, looking down and falling asleep, just leaning against my shoulder. He also was brought to visits, having been in a vehicle with a visitation monitor and crane for over 30 minutes. And came in, and within 20 minutes was throwing up all over the floor with the visitation monitor, smirking as though she thought it was funny. He had visitation monitors putting his shoes on backwards for him, and then lying when he said that they did it when I asked. And just innocently as a child would say, "And did." She would counter and lie to his face and invalidate him, saying, "No, Oliver did it." So that is just a few things that happened to my son, which were outward, visible signs of torture. And Michelle Erickson was his social worker at the time. Michelle Erickson is one of the biggest liars I've met. She was responsible, directly responsible for reporting any kind of harm that was done to my son. She never made a report, ever. And she has had previous work with the Navy, the United States Navy, at a Navy facility. And almost every single person that we were dealing with was connected to the military in some way. I would say most of the people on a religious basis, about 90% of the people involved in that specific CPS case, CPS stands for Child Protective Services, was Catholic. And then out of the whole 100% of the individuals who were involved, whether they were Catholic or not, I would say probably 95% of them were military connected, United States military connected. So why there was such a high interest in having almost everyone that was circling the wagon be so tightly connected to the military is interesting to me. When I reported the cut that out of my son's face, Michelle Erickson wrote back to me saying I talked to Holly, the guardian at the time, and basically what Michelle was saying, it's a scratch. So they didn't realize that I took a photo of it, because I did, in the bathroom. And not knowing that I had evidence to prove whatever they claimed it was on paper was a lie, they said that it was just a scratch. As if, a little cat scratch. And I then put up evidence on my blog that showed it was a cut. And then the judge is totally corrupt. The judge was Judge Hotchkiss. He's very corrupt, bribable man. And he decided to put a restraining order at that time as soon as I had evidence that showed they were concealing crimes against my son. This is Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services supposedly protects the children, right? This was like the exact opposite. It was a total reversal of everything that you have ever believed in, that they supposedly stand for, that they're getting paid for. And as soon as I had evidence that they were lying, the judge then took an order or request from the Attorney General of the state, of Washington State, Ann McIntosh, and her name is actually Mary Ann McIntosh, and she requested that all video and photographic evidence from me be kept out of the record and out of the visits. So after that, the very next time, knowing that I didn't have any means of doing that, or else the judge said I'd be in contempt of court and go to jail, my son came to me in the next visit with a black eye. And it was a very dark, pronounced black eye. There was no possible way that he fell on something and did that. It was an assault. The other thing that happened to my son after that was that he came to a visit with a tooth that was chipped, and he again he was coming to visits looking like he was tortured and had been hypnotized. One time, finally, one of the very last times that I saw my son, which is when the state decided to cut off my visits almost immediately, I think out of concern that I was going to continue reporting what they were doing to my child. He came to a visit and he started to go into a hypnotic state. I've been a nanny and babysat children since I was 11 years old. I am now almost 38 years old. I have an immense amount of experience with children, and have not only just read books and been interested in child development, I have spent almost my entire life with other people's children. And actually a lot of those parents, I'm finding out now, were federal workers. So I know what is normal for a child in the whole range of emotions and being tired or distraught or distressed or upset, angry, whatever it is. And my son was not acting like normal. And he went into what I could only describe as a very clear hypnotic state. And at that point, I could probably get into more detail as to why would I think that. But I guess I will try to explain further. Some of the toys that were being used in the visits were being used outside of visits. So somebody was taking toys from those CPS state rooms and visiting my son somehow and using them, like coaching him through things. I mean, basically all I can say is my son's been a victim of some sort of government mind control and military assault program. Like toys were being taken and he was familiar with them outside of the visitation. So when I was then holding up these there were these horses, little toy figure horses, and when I held them up to my son he started telling me what to do with them, as if somebody had already been using those horses in a certain manner so that he knew. He wanted me to repeat something that someone was doing with him all the time, who had obviously had a lot of contact with him. And so he spoke up and he said, okay, now do the thing. Like, for example, if you have a child and you give him a piggyback ride all the time, and the child sees you and says, do the thing where I go on your back, and do the piggyback ride, then if you've never given your child a piggyback ride before, somebody must have given your child a piggyback ride, because how would your child know about that? So this is the sort of thing that my son was coming into visits with. He was clearly showing that someone was using toys outside of that visitation room for some sort of programming idea. And what my son was telling me to do was basically, he was trying to instruct me to do what someone was doing with him, which was basically, that I find out, to hypnotize him. So I did what he asked me, I did what he told me to do, or what he asked, which came to his mind because of what the state was doing with him, and held it up, and then he started to go into a trance, into a hypnotic state, and was almost unconscious, and he wasn't tired. And when I said out loud with Anne Crane, this visitation monitor, she claims to be a Unitarian. She is basically nothing. She's not anything other than, from what I've heard, an FBI agent. I mean, I've heard that she's connected to the FBI. I haven't heard anything else about her as to religion.